Hello there. Doing this video kind of in response to some conversations I've been seeing online recently on YouTube and some various online forums that I keep an eye on, talking about whether the wood that an electric guitar is made of has any influence on the way that the guitar sounds when it's plugged in. Now, this is something I've seen debated countless times in the past. But there's a bit of a debate going on YouTube and a couple of forums I've seen where somebody's put forward what I believe is an opinion, but he's put it over very much as a fact. And personally, I disagree with them. Now, I know if you get bothered, every time you see somebody on the internet who you disagree with, you shouldn't kind of let it wind you up or anything. It's just really the way that this guy was putting his opinion over, and I know it's got my back up, and it's got quite a few other people's backs up. So really, I don't want to enter into the debate and start having an argument with anybody online. I just thought it'd be an interesting subject for a video, so I thought I'd just put my two penneth in here and talk about my views on the subject of how wood affects how the guitar sounds. When you've got an electric guitar, it's an assembly of a whole bunch of different components. The guitar body, the neck, the frets, the machine heads, the strings, the bridge. Everything is part of a system. Even the way that you hold the guitar against you. If you use your fingers or you use a pick, if you're using a pick, how you hold the pick, the type of material that the pick's made out of, it all affects the way that the guitar sounds acoustically. And you can hear that, if you've got a couple of guitars at your disposal and you just try playing them acoustically, they'll have their own distinctive sound. Nobody's really arguing about that because that's something you can hear very, very readily. Where the debate's really coming in is about once that guitar's plugged in, the sound you get comes from the amplifier, and the sound that goes to the amplifier is generated by these things, by the pickups, by the electrics, and then that just becomes an electrical signal that goes into the amplifier, and that gives you your sound. So the argument is it shouldn't matter what the guitar sounds like acoustically, because ultimately the sound is coming from these magnetic pickups. Now, there's a lot of logic behind that, because it's true. The sound comes from the signal that's created in these pickups. But what you've got to remember is that the way the strings vibrate over the magnet, it's all affected by this whole system. The way that you strike the strings, the way that the strings vibrate, the way that the guitar resonates to certain frequencies, and so on. And when you play a note on a guitar, say you're playing like an A, that string's vibrating at a particular frequency. In the case of A, constant pitch A, it's 440 Hertz, so that's 440 times a second. That string's vibrating. That gives you the pitch of A. But what you've got in there's all sorts of overtones and harmonics, and where the instrument really gets its voice is the way that the different parts of the guitar react to those overtones and amplify some and absorb others, and that's what gives the guitar its voice, acoustically. So when the string's vibrating, it's moving through the magnetic field from these pickups, causing an electrical signal to be created, and then that goes to the amplifier. But because that electrical signal comes from the way that the string vibrates, the way that the string's moving through the magnetic field, anything that affects the way that that string moves and vibrates through the magnetic field will have an influence on the electrical signal that's created by the pickup. And people have shown this, that even if you're only using the bridge pickup on the guitar, like this, the neck pickup is going to have an influence on the sound, because for all it's not actually active, there's still a magnetic field coming from the pickups, and they will pull the strings ever so slightly. It's a really subtle effect, but they will slow the strings down, pull them slightly, take some of the power out of the vibration of the string, and that affects the sound that comes out of the bridge pickup that's actually being used. And I know there's guitarists who will physically remove a neck pickup if there's one there because they don't want it affecting the sound. So with that in mind, I'm thinking about all the different parts of the guitar, everything here that affects the way the strings vibrate, the way the whole guitar body resonates, will have an effect on the way the string's moving, and so the signal that it induces in the pickup, and then the sound that goes out to the amplifier. Now, if we're talking about an electric guitar, yes, the type of pickup that you use has a big influence on the type of sound. You know, whether it's a single coil, if it's a humbucker, it's going to have a particular basic kind of sound, or it could be wound as a very high output pickup, going to drive the amp a little bit more. You know, the different types of magnets. There's all sorts of factors that you can build into a pickup design that affect the voice of the guitar in that way. But ultimately, it's working with the vibration of the string through that magnetic field. So the way that the strings move, vibrate and resonate, and if they're influenced by the way the guitar sounds acoustically, then that's going to have an effect on the sound that comes out of the pickup. Now, how much or how little the effect of different tone woods and so on has on your sound, or you know, any of the parts on the guitar that affect this whole system, how much effect they have on your sound, I think it's quite subjective to the listener. You know, some people are much more tuned in to subtle variances in sound than other people. You know, a really good example is somebody like guitarist called Eric Johnson, and he's a real stickler for the way his guitar sounds. But he claims he can tell the difference between, you know, what kind of metal is used for the connector on the guitar lead, you know, what brand of battery even that's being used in effects pedals. You know, he's very sensitive to differences in sound. You know, personally, I can't really tell the difference if it's a Duracell or an Energizer or whatever battery in an effects pedal. It all sounds the same to me. I mean, haven't got as sensitive an ear as somebody like Eric Johnson. Other things, I can hear the difference in, you know, the difference between different types of pickup or the difference between different types of wood in a guitar. I can hear that, so I do believe that there's something in this. It's just a case of, I think, what your levels of perception are. As I say, everything in this guitar in some way affects its sound. You know, if I did something really radical like refret this and put some bigger fret wire in, I think it would sound different because there's more metal there. When I fret down, it'll push the tone from the strings into the neck more. It'll make it resonate differently, and it'll sound different to the way it does with the fret wire that it's got in here. That's probably something we could hear. But even something as subtle as, for argument's sake, there's some screws in the control cavity on the back here. You know, they're into the guitar body. They're part of the overall system. If I took those out and I replaced them with, you know, screws made out of a different material, it affects the mass of the guitar. You know, we're talking about, you know, maybe a fraction of a gram. It affects it. I honestly don't believe I could hear the difference. Maybe if we took the guitar and we put it in an acoustic, like an anechoic chamber, and rigged up all sorts of really clever scientific equipment, we might be able to see the difference if we analyse the sound on an oscilloscope or something. But it's not something we could hear. We're just not sensitive enough to hear that degree of change. But larger factors, you know, to one degree or another, you know, I think people can pick up on. And I strongly believe that the guitar wood has an effect on the way that the strings vibrate and the way that sound then is transferred to the pickups into the amplified sound. So yes, you can definitely hear a difference on the guitar acoustically based on what it's made of, and I believe that is actually transferred into the amplified sound in some way. As I say, the whole guitar, everything is a system, including you, and you influence the way that the strings vibrate and the way that the guitar sounds. I had a good example a few weeks ago. I was jamming with one of my friends. He had a really nice guitar, Fender Stratocaster, loads of really nice backline, and he was just playing away, and he said, "Oh, I need a pick, have you got one handy?" So I just reached over and I handed him mine, and it was this one. Now this is a wooden plectrum, and he normally plays with a plastic pick, a Delrin pick. As soon as he started playing with his wooden one, both of us in the room, we could hear the difference in sound out of his guitar. He was quite taken aback by how actually better it sounded with the wooden pick. but that's because the pick strikes the string in a particular way, imparts a certain level of attack that then influences how the lifetime of the string vibration from that initial attack through the decay, the sound, and the way that it sustains. It's all influenced by the way that you play the guitar, and it affects the sound. So really just kind of an opinion piece, this really. Does the material that a guitar is made out of affect the way that it sounds? Yes, it affects the way it sounds acoustically, and it affects the way that it sounds when it's plugged in. So just my personal opinion. I've seen a lot of debate recently online, and I thought I'd just pitch in with my opinion on that. Not telling you what to think, so just telling you what I think. And if you're interested, try a few experiments. If you've got guitars made out of different materials, compare the way that they sound. Maybe tune your ear into being able to recognise the guitars with a glued-in neck tend to have certain acoustic characteristics compared to guitars with a bolt-on neck, or the way that a maple fingerboard sounds compared to a guitar with a rosewood fingerboard, or guitars where the body's made out of a certain wood, what sort of characteristics they have. Kind of get your ear tuned in. And it all helps as well if you come to buy a guitar, if you see a guitar for sale, and you know what acoustic properties you like. If you've got a particular preference for guitar bodies that are made out of, say, mahogany or maple or ash or whatever, and then it can help you to guide your decisions about other guitars that you buy. Okay, so as I say, that's just my thoughts on the subject. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video sometime soon. Bye for now.